One of what I talk about is washichu. White women have a glass ceiling. Indian women have a buckskin ceiling. It stretches. So it makes you feel like you're making progress. Yeah, 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 and then it comes really good down.
Cecilia Fire Thunder is one of my favorite people. She is Oglala Lakota and the former president of her tribe. I met up with her last week at the National Congress of American Indians meeting, where I am now in Seattle. We talked about how she leads and this thing of she calls the buckskin ceiling. Before we go on, before we start the interview, be sure to take a moment to comment, share, and subscribe. This is Breaking History, and I'm Mark Trahant. Now, my conversation with Cecilia Fire Thunder. As we sat down, she reminded me that we've known each other for more than 40 years. That's a good start to any conversation.
One of what I talk about is washichu. White women have a glass ceiling. Indian women have a buckskin ceiling. It stretches. So it makes you feel like you're making progress. Yeah, 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 and then it comes really good down. So every woman, like, first of all, was Wilma took her knife and cut a little piece. Also, what you're talking about is every Indian woman that went up that way, cut a little piece of that buckskin ceiling. I contributed to it, and every other Indian woman in leadership. So now there's no buckskin ceiling. It's no longer there. It's wide open. The analogy I always use to show the difference between Native women leaders and white women. Years ago, when I started, I've always, my mom made sure we registered to vote when I was 18. And in Lakota, she said that the reason you have to register and vote is your dad, your uncles, all these Indian men wore the uniform of the United States and were in Korea, they were in Germany, Europe, so you can have the freedom to vote. And that stayed with me. So I've been a registered voter since I was 18 because my mother made sure that the reason why was because of the sacrifices that the men made in my family. Anyway, so back up a little bit. And then I know right now that Perry, South Dakota, we had 3 Indian women in the state legislature. And that's another place I would like to see more Indian women in the state houses.
We love our children and we love the land. We all fight to have that future.
Here's the thing. I'm always talking about states. There are 50 states in the United States, and 23 have Indian tribes. The other 27 don't. So today, one of the things in talking to tribal leaders, how do we create a educational format to reach the members of Congress of those 7 states who have no Indian? Because invariably our issue when it goes to the House or the Senate will come to that committee and they have to say yes or no. If they don't know who we are, it's going to be probably no. And so that's the missing piece in tribal leadership. I'm always trying to educate tribal leaders. Our senators and congressmen more often support we ask. So then just say hi, good morning, and go across the hall to a member of Congress who has no Indians and educate them. How do we educate them? That's a question that I've been asking. How do we create an education material? What do we do to remind every member of Congress? And of course, you start with Article 6 in the Constitution of the United States, and even a lot of Indians have not read that.
Right. And even beyond the words of Article 6, I don't think most people know that when the United States was trying to get established, they were borrowing tribal sovereignty to get recognized by Europe.
Yeah.
It was a very close relationship in the sense that we need you.
Yeah, thank you. And so again, history books have to be rewritten. And I think educating our people more. I do that all the time.
It actually leads me to a story that I've heard you tell before that I want to ask again about. So you were elected leader of Oglala, and after that ended, one of the first persons you had a connection with was Barbara Jordan.
Yeah.
Maybe tell me about that.
It was really interesting. I've always admired Barbara Jordan. I lived in California years ago, and I've always been interested in politics. I've always, again, it's an interest that some people have. I was always interested in power and politics. I was a nurse years ago, so I was getting ready to go to work. I worked night shift. I had 2 boys, and I was a sole income, so I worked night shift. So childcare didn't cost that much, you know. So I was getting ready to go to work. It was the Democratic National Convention that was going on. I can't remember what year. And so as I was watching the Democratic National Convention and getting ready to go to work, they introduced this woman, Marva Jordan, to be the keynote speaker. I actually sat down and watched and listened to this amazing, articulate Black woman.
It was 144 years ago that members of the Democratic Party first met in convention to select a presidential candidate. Since that time, Democrats have continued to convene once every 4 years and draft a party platform and nominate a presidential candidate. And our meeting this week is a continuation of that tradition. But there is something different about tonight. There is something special about tonight. What is different? What is special? I, Barbara Jordan, am a keynote speaker. We are a people in search of a national community. We are a people trying not only to solve the problems of the present, unemployment, inflation, but we are attempting on a larger scale to fulfill the promise of America. We are attempting to fulfill our national purpose to create and sustain a society in which all of us are equal.
To listen to her tell her story of, her story of how she became an elected official and how, as a Black woman in Houston, I think, Texas, disenfranchised, powerless, and she came to the ranks and she was elected into the House of, well, first of all, the Texas state legislature. And that alone was a milestone, probably the first Black woman ever elected. And so that really caught my attention because Texas has always been, for me, a very racist state, and some of the politics out of Texas were unlike any other state. So needless to say, I was like, as I just watched her body language, her articulate she was in power and control. She was just well-balanced woman, and that just blew me away. And then the next thing, and then she talked about how, and later on I got to know more about her background and how she was the first Black woman in the Texas state legislature. Imagine walking into a room of racist white men who historically, they may have been slave owners, and they, and they don't think we're good as they are because we're dark, okay? That's built in, okay? And then she walks into this, it's how, I think, God, that must have been scary to walk into these chambers where you're the only Black woman. And for her to walk in, because she is a citizen of the United States of America, and she has every right to be there. She believed that wholeheartedly. Her actions, her behavior indicated that. That blew me away. And I just had the greatest fond respect for that woman. And I think maybe that's what guided me. I'm not Black, I'm brown, I didn't have to put up with her history. It was interesting. Anyway, but she was able to win over out of the members of the state legislature, got picked on. People went hunting with white guys, And then the other piece, and then, of course, then she ran for Congress. And I always remember when in Congress, she was a member of a committee that was listening to why Nixon should be impeached.
Today, I am an inquisitor, and hyperbole would not be fictional and would not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total. And I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution. who can so properly be the inquisitors for the nation as the representatives of the nation themselves? The subjects of its jurisdiction are those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, and that's what we're talking about. In other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. It is wrong, I suggest, it is a misreading of the Constitution for any member here to assert that for a member to vote for an article of impeachment means that that member must be convinced that the president should be removed from office. The Constitution doesn't say that. The powers relating to impeachment are an essential check in the hands of the body, the legislature, against and upon the encroachments of the executive. The division between the two branches of the legislature, the House and the Senate, assigning to the one the right to accuse and to the other the right to judge. The framers of this Constitution were very astute. They did not make the accusers and the judges the same person.
So it was national. It was broadcast nationally, the evidence on President Nixon. And her committee was kind of, it was interesting that her committee was not considered important to get national, However, it seems like her committee came on late afternoon, and I remember her saying something that was blew me away. She said, here she is, a woman, a Black woman who wasn't even considered human when he created this document called the Constitution of the United States. And here she is, sitting to make a decision about removing the city. Imagine that. So I think that's the foundation for me, because I was grateful that I'm just an Indian woman, and I didn't have to put up with all of the history and being a Black woman. And if this Black woman can understand that and work and move, why not me? That makes sense. So why not me? I could, but she was probably. And then the other woman was the former governor of Texas, Ann Richards. Another woman that's absolutely blew me away. So Black women and the white women were my role models. Does that make sense?
And we'll have more of the interview with Cecilia Fire Thunder in part 2 of our conversation. I'm Mark Trahant, and this is Breaking History.